Okay, members, welcome to this meeting of our new Eastern Committee. Not so new, no, but certainly Eastern anyway. For those millions watching on the internet, I am Paul Rivers and I have the pleasure of chairing this committee. And I shall start the meeting by asking those present, asking members of the committee to confirm themselves through Kim that we are all here. So if anybody's not here, please put your hand up. That looks fine to me. Thank you. I'll get there eventually. So this evening we are supported by Barry Devlin, our planning solicitor, Chris French, area team leader, Kate Edwards, principal planning officer, Kimberly Soane, Democratic Services Officer, and Georgina Hall, Democratic Services Officer, who will be taking minutes. Right. So, agenda item number 1, apologies for absence and any substitutions. Kim, could you take us through any absences and substitutions, please?
Yes, Chairman. We have apologies from Councillor George Wilson and Councillor Maxine Gale. Councillor Nick Palmer was due to substitute, but unfortunately hasn't arrived yet. And we had no substitute for Councillor Gale as it was a late apology.
Thank you. Item number 2, minutes of the last meeting. I am to ask the committee to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 11th of August 2021, which have been published on the council's website. Members, are you happy to approve the minutes? Thank you. Item number 3, declarations of interest. Kim, have any declarations of interest been received?
None received prior to the meeting, Chairman.
Thank you. Members, any to be announced? No? Good. Item 4, questions by members of the public. Kim, I think we have some questions.
Yes, Chairman. An email was received from a member of the public raising 3 questions. In relation to a question regarding under provision of allocated parking for some units, officers responded stating that the overall quantum, including visitor spaces shown on the site plan, was in excess of the Waverley standard overall, and therefore the slight under provision of allocated parking for some units was considered acceptable. In relation to a question regarding building heights and whether these skew the SHMA recommendations, officers advised that the building heights have been set for a combination of designs and accommodation reasons, and that the outline consent did not prohibit 2.5 and 3-storey development. The mix of units will need to balance across the whole 425 unit development and does not match the originally specified mix for this phase individually. And in relation to a condition regarding electric vehicle points, officers responded that conditions are recommended to update the requirements of the outline consent, as the outline consent was for trickle charges.
Thanks, Kim. Councillor Cossar.
I just asked, Chairman, wouldn't it be normal for questions submitted to this committee to be circulated in advance to members? I genuinely don't, unless other members have, I don't recall seeing them or suggested answers either.
That's true, Kim.
That is true, Councillor Cossar, and I will ensure that you're aware of them, that you've have a copy of them. Unfortunately, they didn't get sent out.
Okay.
Okay. It was just an administration error, Councillor Cossar. I do apologise.
No, sorry, it's just very difficult to take that.
Yes. You will receive. I will make sure that the committee actually receive a copy of the questions and the answers after the meeting.
Councillor Else.
Am I correct in assuming that this is in relation to the application that we're considering tonight? Okay.
It is, right. Yes, Councillor Else.
We quite often get sort of generic questions at this stage. Thank you.
Thanks, Kim. Item 5, questions by members. Kim, any questions received from
None received,
our members?
Chairman.
Thank you. And now, item 6, for the exciting relevant updates. May I ask Chris French for any updates to government guidance or legislation?
Thank you, Chairman. No, there's no updates at the moment.
Okay, thank you. And we move on then to applications for planning, and We only have one tonight and it's not subject to public speaking. The application before us is item 8.1 WA 2021-0263, land south of High Street between Alfold Road and Knoll Lane, Cranley. And Kate Edwards will take us through it. Kate.
Thank you very much, Chair. So the proposal here is for the third phase of a wider development, which already has outline consent. The wider development is for 425 units, and this application is for 197 of those units, so with reserved matters detailed. Excuse me, sorry, I'm just there we go. So you can see the location plan here. As you can see, it's a quite large site to the south of the High Street in Cranley, with Knoll Lane there just to the right hand side of the page, and Alfold Road to the left. So the site is in effect the middle portion of the site, as you can see outlined in red there. And here you can see a phasing plan for the whole of the outline consent, which is for 425 units. The lighter green area to the right hand side is phase 1, which is has been completed on site. To the opposite side of the site, phase 2, phase 2.1, I understand is currently taking place and nearing completion. And phase 2.2, which is the main body of that phase, has also commenced on site. So as you can see, that there would just were phase 3 to come forward, the area in yellow there, phase 4 to come forward, which we haven't yet had details for. So here we can see a few photos of the site. It's a greenfield site which doesn't really sit within the street scene of any street scenes within the village currently. This is the photo on the left is looking across the current application site from an existing site compound, which is within the phase 4 area of the development, which we just saw on the plan. The photo to the right is looking towards the Downs link, so to the north of the application site, and you can see the existing tree line there, with all of those trees proposed to be retained and subject to tree protection. And then this photo again looks across the application site towards the area to the west, where phase 2 is currently taking place, again with the tree line there to be protected, marking the field divide. So now moving to the proposed plans, you can see here the proposed block plan with the buildings shown in white. As you can see, they're distributed throughout the development with a similar access road layout as per the indicative scheme we saw at outline. As you can see, they're right in the centre of the, I can't move that mouse through, right in the centre of the site there. They're proposing to provide a new area which they've termed within the application as a village square, which would be open space. And they're also proposing just to the north here, they're proposing a community garden area which was secured through the legal agreement of the outline consent. In addition to that, they're proposing links through onto the Downs link, so there would effectively be a route through for future residents to onto the Downs link and to the area to the back of the Waverley car park in Cranley Centre. This phase also proposes to provide a play area, which you can just see there in the bottom right hand corner of the site plan. And looking now at the proposed buildings themselves, we have a street scene here, and this street scene effectively sort of goes it's through the centre of the site. So moving downwards through the site at the centre, you can see there the variety of buildings which you would see. And this street scene here is for the, it shows the development as it would appear onto the southern boundary of the site, adjacent to the green buffer that you will have seen on the site plan there. So as you can see, there would be some variety in the building forms. Sorry, I'm just having a bit of a problem with the slide here. Oh, there we go. I've got some example elevations here. So as you can see, there would be some 2.5 to 3-storey properties and semi-detached. There would be a mix throughout the development of terrace, semi-detached, detached and flatted buildings as well. And sort of looking at the figures for the development in terms of the unit mix, there's a table here. So there would be 21 one-bedroom, 62 bedroom, 73 bedroom and 46 4-bedroom plus units, so a total of 197 units. And the affordable housing would be 57 of those units, which is in line with the legal agreement that's been established at outline stage for the scheme overall, the 425 units providing 30% affordable housing. And just to confirm, the recommendation is to approve. The key considerations for the committee, because it's obviously reserved matters stage now, so the principal considerations are established by the outline, but the key considerations now are in relation to the provision of affordable housing, design and visual impact, residential amenity, car parking and highways, and trees. Thank you. Oh, yes, and sorry, yes, thank you for the reminder, Chris. I've also, you will have seen that there's an update sheet, which I'm not expecting you to have read in the last few minutes, but I'll just talk you through these changes. Firstly, there are a few updates to the plan references, just because with so many plans there were a few errors and omissions. Secondly, there's a note that we've had an additional representation from Cranley Parish Council. I think when the Parish Council reviewed some recent minor amendments to the plans, it appeared that the number of units had been reduced, but that's not actually the case. It remains that 197 units are still proposed. We've also had an additional representation, which we were expecting at this stage, from the Highway Authority. They've just confirmed that they don't have any objection to the proposal, and they have provided us with a schedule of recommended conditions, which was slightly different to the highway conditions I'd recommended in the original report. So I've just updated those. I've updated the electric vehicle charging point condition to their reasoning. And I've also added on conditions in relation to the provision of junctions within the site, the provision of ensuring the provision of space, the parking spaces are shown on the plan when the site comes forward, and finally for the provision of the footpath links through from the site onto the dam. We've also, since the report publication, had an additional representation from a member of the public, which was listed as neither in support nor against the proposal, from the occupiers of 2 railway cottages, and they stated they're in effect concerned regarding the proposed boundary treatment. From the plan we currently have, it doesn't appear that it is, as they suspect, a low open fence. It appears that they are proposing a 1.8 metre close boarded standard type fence in that location. But notwithstanding that, the boundary details we'd normally expect to come forward at condition stage, and we've got the landscaping condition, so there would be time for the parties to discuss what they're both expecting for the boundary prior to those details coming forward at condition stage. There's also a note here regarding housing mix. The table provided within the report refers to 62 2-bedroom and 68 3-bedroom units, but in fact it's 62 bedroom and 73 bedroom units, which is self-explanatory. I also just wanted to sort of note, following the comments that we had from members of the public prior to the meeting, that the report refers to an acceptable unit mix being provided within the phase, which is the case, but I just thought I'd provide further clarification around that, in that the number of 3 and 4 beds proportionally are slightly higher, in the region of 5% higher than in the indicative mix at outline stage. However, the proposal isn't necessarily judged against that mix, it's judged against the up-to-date SMART, and we consider it fully acceptable in that regard. And finally here I've just got a note that there's a reference to the 29 MPPF, and just to confirm that the recent update, the 2021 MPPF, is very much along the same lines, so just to update that reference. And finally I've got some recommended additional informatives, most of which came through from the Highway Authority within the late representation. And that is everything. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. So we're talking about, in terms of your recommendation, subject to conditions 1 to 19 now, rather than 1 to 17.
That's correct. Yes. Thank
Right.
you.
I think you explained that very nicely. I just thought I'd stress that. Members, can we take questions for Kate first, please? Councillor Townsend.
Thank you. I have a few questions. I must admit, I am a little bit disappointed about the statement central building, which is sort of this mock Georgian looking thing. I'm not sure that it is very indicative of the Cranley vernacular. And also that it doesn't appear to have many flats with any outdoor space. And I know that's something that we have highlighted. Again, the importance of those outdoor spaces, balconies, Juliet balconies, which are on one of the other flatted buildings. But I just wonder whether or not that was ever suggested that by officers, whether they could improve on that at all. So I wouldn't mind an answer to that. Obviously, the style is a matter of personal choice, and I'd be interested to see what other members think as well. On some of the other buildings, there's a suggestion of a various coloured hardy plank being used, and as opposed to a more natural material. And I know when we discussed this application, and I know this is reserved matters, but previously we were looking at, using natural materials, and I wonder why the change has gone now to hardy plank, particularly because personally I think it slightly cheapens the design as well. So I would wonder, I would like officers' opinion on that. That there is a significant formal water feature that's been put in front of the feature building, and in particularly in line of condition 16, which obviously states that there's insufficient water supply and that houses can't be occupied until the water network upgrades have been carried out. I really wonder whether or not we should be encouraging such large water features, because we are in an area of water stress. We know that. We're trying to tackle climate change, and then we're encouraging people to use less water within their homes. Are saying, don't use any more than 110 litres, and then outside the house they've got a trickling away fountain, which might be wasting several litres of water. So I would like to know officers' opinion on that. As I mentioned, the condition about the Thames water, there are two strands to that condition. One is not to allow the occupation until all the network upgrades have been carried out, and another one refers to the phasing plan. And I just wonder within those phases, will those, if that should be agreed as part of the application, will the impact on local water supply be calculated for each of the phases to make sure that there isn't an impact? Because after the last 2 weeks I've had in Cranley with broken water pipes and people having to have bottled water delivered to their homes, you know, this is a very, very topical. And on my way here, I passed another burst water main in the high street. So it's a very topical subject within Cranley, and people are extremely concerned about it. There is, I have some other questions as well, and I'm sorry to take this time, but I do really want the answer to these as well. There are 2 footpaths mentioned linking to the Downs link, and I want to know if these are going to be accessible for other people within Cranley, because recently on one of the new estates, we've had a sign erected which says that it's private and no one must enter through that estate. So people who used to perhaps walk their dogs through there or just wander through there for a walk and now are being told that they can't go through there. So is this estate going to be a private estate, or is it just the roads are unadopted? In which case we have lots of unadopted roads in Cranley and people are allowed to pass freely along them. But is this going to be a private estate where these footpaths, and the permeability was mentioned when outline stage, you know, that it will allow people to walk through there to the new parkland, which is proposed beyond. But if this is going to be obstructed, if people aren't going to be allowed there, I just would like to know now whether or not, you know, anyone's going to allow to wander through. There was mention as well on the application, and I really appreciate that you're jotting down my questions, but I can go through them again, that there was evidence of a badger path across the top of the site. And within these Surrey Wildlife Trust letter of the 28th of June, they do also mention, as well as the length, they also mention that immediately prior to the start of development works, a survey by an appropriately qualified ecologist should be undertaken to check for any new signs of badger set construction on site. That doesn't seem to have come through to a condition, and I really think it should, because there were badgers on this site which were relocated, and very often they can come back. So I really think it's important that that is added as a condition, unless, you know, there's a reason why it shouldn't be. I'm very, you know, glad to see that we have to establish net gain in biodiversity. But one of the other things, you know, that I've seen on these sites is, you know, having lots and lots of close board fencing, but not having things like hedgehog tunnels. And I hope that that will come through within the net gain on biodiversity. Also, there's this wide-scale use of Wildflower Meadows, and whilst it looks lovely on the drawings and you know, it's fantastic, I've already had complaints from people living on a part of this estate that they're not being established properly. And I know it's really difficult on our clay soil. And whilst it does look lovely, you know, we do have responsibility as the planning authority to make sure that these areas are maintained and that they do end up being the lovely looking places that are promised by the developers. And I don't think, and this is a question, Kate, that they're covered by the 5-year replanting that covers trees and shrubs. So maybe they could end up just being lost within the maintenance schedule. So you've already covered, thank you, the 2 railway cottages, and I'd be really pleased if some additional planting or that the boundary planting for them can be arranged, or some fencing which they deem to be acceptable. That would be great. On page 23, it mentions about overlooking from the flatted building, which is plots 282 and 293. Particularly on 6 Eastview Lane, and that it should only be bathroom windows and they will be obscured. But again, that hasn't come through to the conditions, and I just wonder whether or not there was a reason that hasn't come through, and I'd be really grateful if you could let me know of that. And then finally, Kate, thank you. I am really disappointed, and I know I say this again and again, that the climate change policies that we have, CC1 and CC2, I just don't find that we're using them. I can't see anything about renewable or low carbon energy supply on site, and if I've overlooked it, I will be thrilled. I can't see what they're doing to minimise energy usage or reusing or recycling materials, and they mention it in their design and access statement, but you know, I just can't see any of this being carried through to the design. And for a development of this size, I must admit that you know, I'd like to see some kind of energy or sustainability statement. Otherwise, we just seem to be blatantly encouraging the extraction of more fossil fuels. And bearing in mind the government's, desire to remove boilers by 2025, I do think that we should be seeing on this site what people are doing for energy, and if at all possible, whether or not there are any conditions we can add for this. Thank you.
Okay, Kate, before you run screaming out of the chamber.
Wasn't that bad, excuse me.
Councillor Townsend, just bearing in mind what Councillor Costa pointed out early in the meeting about questions not being given to members first. I wonder if you would, at some stage, or we do it in the future, is to give these questions to the officers so that they can come up with.
I would love to do that, Chairman, and whenever possible, I do try and contact officers. But in this case, I have been swamped by the neighbourhood plan for Cranley, and I've only had a chance to look at this application today. And I thought sending these to Kate at sort of 5 to 5, she probably would dislike that even more. So apologies for that.
Well, no problem to me. Anyway, Kate, over to you. Good luck.
Thank you very much, Councillor Townsend. I've written my note of the question, so if I miss anything, please let me know. Okay, in relation to the flats and outdoor space, like balconies and so on, I haven't directly approached the applicant, no, asking that they add those in. Simply because it's felt that generally there isn't a deficiency in amenity space in the area, so the scheme overall provides a number of play areas, and as we've seen from the site plan, there's a fairly large area at the centre of the site which is proposed to remain open. So no, we haven't directly asked for those changes. In relation to the question regarding false wood type alternative materials, the materials we would expect to come forward to discharge a condition of the outline consent. So they're not detailed within this application, although the elevations we've seen do show a visual of certain materials. We're having a separate conversation in relation to a previous phase of the development regarding the materials, but obviously our preference is for natural materials, and that's something we'll bear in mind going forwards through those negotiations. In relation to the question around water features, I appreciate the concerns you're expressing there. I noted when I went out on site that the same part of the site where the water feature is actually proposed is currently in effect gathered as a pond of water and has been slightly dug out for that purpose. So in effect, I think it serves a drainage purpose to some extent as well, or a role in collecting water on the site. I professionally didn't have any objection to that water feature, but it may be something you may want to discuss. In relation to the Thames water condition, again, this would be something which we'll be looking at really at condition stage. I've not actually come across an application to discharge any of those Thames water phasing plans yet. But when we do, certainly for phase 2.1, we would expect, when we're looking at it in phase 3, where consent to be granted, we would expect that to sort of appreciate the cumulative impact at that stage, although when we're looking at it for earlier phases, we may not be considering phase 3, if you know what I mean. So yes, I would expect that to be cumulatively accommodated. In relation to the footpaths onto the Downs link and whether they'd be accessible to members of the public, there aren't any conditions either within the outline consent or any clauses within the legal agreement preventing, if it was sought, the potential future privatisation of the site. Notwithstanding that, that's not something the applicant has put forward to us, and not something that they need permission for. It would come down really to their management of the site. In relation to the question regarding the Badger Path, from as you read out the Surrey Wildlife Trust comments there, it does sound like they recommended probably it would be useful to have a condition there, which wasn't my initial reading. So thank you for pointing it out. In that respect, I would, Chair, recommend a 20th condition, just to secure a site walkover immediately prior to starting for this phase, in line with the Surrey Wildlife Trust comments. I think that would be valid and pass the 6 tests of a condition. In relation to the wildflower meadow planting, I was sort of just in the process of looking over the detailed wording of the landscaping condition. I mean, what I would say is we have the landscaping reserved by condition for the full details, although we've got the master plan within the submission currently. So I think that's something probably we need to bear in mind when we get to the stage of discharging those details, and if there is further wildflower meadow planting proposed, that we make sure there is an understanding with that of how that would be managed and maintained. Now, I'll need to come back to you on the overlooking question because I'm afraid I didn't get the page reference. And then in relation to our sustainability policies, from the detailed wording of those policies, I don't feel that within part 1, which is the development plan as it stands, until part 2 is adopted, that there is enough weight within those policies for us to be insisting that a developer provides renewable energy on that basis. So that's not something which which has been considered as a requirement against the application. And I think that was everything. So thank you for that, and I'll pass back to you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate.
Can I just confirm it was page 23 that I was talking about the obscure windows? Thank you. Thank you, Kate.
Now, if it's possible, Councillor Gray, that you have a question that hasn't already been covered, over to you, sir.
I think I do. If I could come on to, first of all, the electric charging point. You put the new condition in there. What it doesn't do is actually specify what the charging rate is. I think you talked about the previous condition not being sufficient. I think we have put minimum charging rates in before. Is it included in one of the documents that we can't see, or should we put something in? The second question, really picking up on what Councillor Townsend said, I'm actually amazed if I heard correctly. You're saying that access to the site can be determined by the developers, and they can do this without actually consulting with us. If that is the case, then certainly I would like to see a condition in here to say that that won't happen. And one of the reasons for that is we're continually told with leaps and laps that this is available to the community. And I mean, there's certainly a couple of developments that in Dunsfold that's very specific to that, but you're saying effectively that they can come and stop that at their whim. My third point, sorry, Mr. Chairman, I think point 2 did overlap a little bit, but it did go on further than Councillor Townsend raised. The third point is highways and other consultees. First of all, I'm very disappointed again that we have Waverley consultees who failed to produce any comments. And I would have thought something like the council's environmental pollution control officer on air quality and other things should at least say no comments. But to have no response received to me is not good enough for a Waverley council. The same applies to the council's environmental health officer. I'm sure we can't really regulate with the health and safety executive, but we could at least make sure our own. On the highways, you note in your comments about the highways is that it's ongoing discussions with the applications. It's disappointing that there's so much come through on the update sheet. one, perhaps Kate could tell us why it's come in so late. And secondly, is there still things ongoing that might come up in addition to this? So if I could just summarize that: charging rates on cars, access, highways late, and highway specifics. Are we finished? Those are my three questions, hopefully slightly simpler than Councillor Townsend's.
Well done, Councillor Gray. Thank you very much, and no apologies needed at all. Kate.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Gray. In relation to the electric vehicle charging points, I altered the recommendation of those conditions to the wording which was proposed for this application directly by the Highway Authority. But notwithstanding that, I could, with your discretion, sort of amalgamate the different points from the previous questions into a new one. So in effect, update the condition within the update to refer to specific voltage. In any case, in relation to the charging points, we would have the option of approving details. So if they came forward with a lesser specification at condition stage, then we'd still be in a position to refuse it. But I think probably you're right that we should put it up front in the condition, so I can make amendments to that effect. In relation to the issue of public accessibility, as I said, I don't think, and it certainly wouldn't be standard practice to restrict that from taking place in the future. So notwithstanding that, we're kind of considering the possibility of potentially attaching a condition to the reserved to this reserved matters application as a possibility if it's a concern, and I don't know if you might want to comment on that, Chris, and indeed Barry might want to comment, so we'll come back to you on that. In relation to the highways comments at this stage in the process, in effect, in relation to the highways, as is quite often the case, and as is helpful to officers, we receive initial comments from the Highway Authority as in effect a working document, and then that may raise issues which we'd then put to the applicant to address, and there'd be some backwards and forwards with the applicant and the Highway Authority. So that was what took place here. The Highway Authority confirmed prior to report publication that they were happy that it was an approval, but there were just a few outstanding issues. Those issues have all now been addressed, and the detail is included within the conditions. So in effect, that was the reason, just that there was that backwards and forwards taking place to make sure everything was fully tied up. And I think that was everything, but please come back if not. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. Councillor Gray, did you get all of those points about the electric charging thing in particular?
Yes, I would certainly like to make an amendment to it to include a minimum 7 kV, which I think we've done before. So whether you want me to propose it now or at a later stage.
Shall we hold on
Right.
that for a bit?
The second point, I think that Kate said she was going to come back on this question of access. I really am concerned about this, because I'm concerned that the assumption we make in most cases is leaps and laps are available to associated places. We're not talking necessarily busing people in, but the local residents who have gone through some of these areas, and also as a route for walking. The people within the site will walk outside into other people's estates and houses, and I would think that the reciprocal should equally be granted. And I think if there's a concern there, we should condition it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, right. Kate, you want Chris or Barry to comment on that? Chris, how would you like to deal with that? Okay, you're behind me, Barry. That's the thing.
Mr. Chairman, I've been reading the Section 106 agreements whilst these questions have been raised. The whole tenor of the agreements is that there are obligations on the parties, the developer and the Highway Authority in particular, to enter into highways agreements in the plural. These are defined to include Section 38 adoption agreements for the construction by the developer of estate roads and footpaths on the estates to a publicly maintainable standard, and thereafter, under law, they will be publicly maintained and public highways. There is nothing in the agreement for the establishment of a private residence management company to set up a fund and to set up revenues to sustain that fund for the maintenance of private roads or footpaths. So the whole tenor of the agreement, it seems to me, envisages that all the estate roads and footpaths will be public and open to all members of the public, whether living on the estate or generally in Cranley. That's why I've asked, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Barry. So that means that your recommendation is that it's covered in the section 106, and we don't need to do anything specific.
That would be my advice, Mr. Chairman. Yes.
Right. Okay. Let me just come back to Chris.
In addition to that, I think we could add a section to the condition, albeit not doing anything additional in terms of the legal agreement, but so the condition that we read out a minute ago, which is on the update sheet on the final page, sorry, the second to last page, it says prior to occupation of plots 323 to 330, the eastern footpath link should be completed, and prior to the occupation of the plots 257 to 261, the western footpath link shall be completed in accordance with the approved plans and retained as such at all times. We could include, albeit, yeah, that would just allow, that would just ensure that would then be retained. It obviously doesn't deal with kind of civil issues, but it sounds like that civil element is more to do with the 106. Thank you, Chairman.
Hang on, Councillor. I've got Councillor Reid down to speak next. Is that the question, Ruth, or is it? Yeah, okay. Would you mind, Councillor Townsend, and I have you, Michael. Would you mind if we just hear Councillor Reid's question?
It just was on that specific point that Chris just made, and I thought it would be pertinent to say it now.
Yeah, I see the point in that very much too. Councillor Reid, can you just hold back just for a minute then, while Councillor Townsend gets
it is just
another follow-up.
Sorry, it is just a quick point on that, is that Kate and I have emailed about this quite a while ago now, and I'm sure Kate probably does remember, but we were specifically told that the roads on the estate were not now going to be adopted by highways a while ago, and this was with regard to actually the management company. I had been told there was a management company that had been set up, and of residents, including residents, and because they were seeking to gate off part of the footpaths. So it is something that I have been told, and I have passed it on to Kate, or Kate actually told me that they were not now adopting the roads. So I think that perhaps the condition might need to be slightly stronger if we are going to do that, and perhaps Barry might like to comment on that further. And that's all I have to say at this point, and I'll pass on to anybody else.
Okay, thanks. In that case, Barry, do you have anything specific to say on Kate's last comment?
Mr. Chairman, this is the first information I've had that that there is an intention to have sections within the overall estates as private gated areas. I'm quite surprised. Yes, I think we need to clarify this as soon as possible with the developers. It's not, there is no provision in the Section 106 agreement for collection of monies off individual properties to sustain a residence management company. So it's difficult to see how they will set that legal mechanism up. This needs some thought. in terms of formulating the condition, we would need to know exactly what some footpaths and roads were envisaged to be made private. I don't know whether there is enough information before the committee to have a precise enough condition in this regard. We welcome comments of my planning colleagues.
Thanks, Barry. I thought we were talking about no bars for anybody walking anywhere, but maybe I just missed the point. Chris, sorry, would you like to comment a bit further on that?
I think really just at the moment, the plans don't show any kind of segregate, kind of separation of the development from the surroundings, and they're showing footpaths, which we're saying we would want to be retained. And I think from what Barry said in the legal agreement, there is a requirement that they would remain usable, the paths from the site. So I don't see it. I don't. Whilst it could be a civil, kind of slightly separate civil point, I don't see it as being an issue at the moment in front of us. And there's no indication that they would be looking to, to stop up that footpath. And we've said that it should be retained. It would be the additional element that I've suggested in the condition.
Okay, thanks, Chris.
Mr. Chairman, sorry, just to add, I'm just thinking this through. A condition has to be precise to be enforceable to satisfy all the requirements of government advice. Though I'm minded perhaps to take the view that a condition requiring that no estate roads and footpaths shall be stopped up so as to become inaccessible to public passage or passage by members of the public, as suitably formatted wording. I think thinking on my feet, this is the first time I've been aware of this. I think that would be enforceable, even though it'd be very wide in its remit, unless there was a particular area of road or footpath in this phase that there are specific concerns about, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thanks, Barry. So unless the fountain area becomes a communal bathing area, as the Romans did, not much we can do. Kate.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd just say if you are able to delegate to us after the meeting to work together as an officer team to confirm a meeting which would look a wording of a condition which would look to address that concern, that's a discussion we can have, bearing in mind what the existing section 106 controls, if that's something the committee could do as part of the recommendation.
Well, I'd certainly be happy for you to do that. Bearing that in mind, Councillor Costa, I did stop you very harshly before. I'm sorry about that, but
I share that thought, Chairman.
I'm also minded that Councillor Reid had her hand up ages ago.
Sorry, it was only
I'm happy to give way to.
Thank you so much. Because it was simply in response to what we've been told. I wanted to ask a question. When you were identifying a condition here, I didn't hear which page and which condition it was. The discussion now seems to have moved on from that. But if I might just be allowed comment in relation to this, Chairman, I think that what is now being proposed is actually essential. I can think of roads in my own ward where they haven't been adopted roads. A residents group has subsequently formed and has sought to take responsibility for maintaining the road and to stop it. But this is in circumstances where the road doesn't pretty much lead anywhere. And if we've got a road that's meant to lead to areas that are meant to be accessible, I think we have an absolute responsibility. And I'm certainly not personally prepared to vote for anything unless I'm absolutely assured that we can secure that in a right and proper way. I think there is some confusion about it at the moment, and it's desperately important that we have a recommendation that secures what is clearly the wish of the committee, I believe. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. But what we're looking for here is give our officers the opportunity to pull together a solid condition on this and, well, really come back to the committee members for their offline agreement. Is that, Kate? Is that what we're looking at doing? I mean, I don't see that we can make a very firm recommendation on that. I think we can trust you on that, in my opinion.
Yes, so I would say, I can say that officers are very clear that the committee has given a clear direction that you feel that the whole of this phase must be publicly accessible, and that the links through to the Downs link must be publicly accessible, because it's a complex issue tying in with the existing legal agreement. I think it would be useful if we can have some time after the meeting to tie that up, on the understanding that we're clear of the direction and what you're seeking to achieve with that condition.
Is it possible within that condition, Kate, can I ask Chairman, is it just possible within that agreement, if like with the section 106 affordable housing, you know, we normally say, and if it's not entered into the agreement, that we sort of don't give planning permission almost, is it possible to make it like that, or at all, to be able to say, you know, if they don't enter into the agreement, that it will be publicly accessible? Is it possible to put a caveat on it at all?
Before we go any further on that, can I just sample the sentiment of the meeting? Are we happy, as I am, for officers to work on this? Oh, okay, Councillor Gray and Councillor Dinas. Sorry, I beg your pardon. It's so odd to see two people agree and nobody else. Yeah, I'm just really looking. I'm not taking a vote here. Yeah. I just really want. Is anybody opposed to Kate and Chris? Yeah. No, it's right. It's
Sorry,
fine.
could I raise a point of order with you? If we're going to delegate, I have no problem, but I still think we should move an amendment right to the condition with the subject that we're not going to define that. We're going to leave that to officers, because effectively we are adding a condition to this. So I'm happy to move it when it's appropriate.
Yeah, well, I think at this point, I would also be happy for you to do that too, because otherwise we can't actually do anything on this subject. So right now, Councillor Gray, if you have a seconder, I think we ought to do that formally.
Yeah, if we could move the two conditions, the electric charging point and the one about access to that, and that's what I would say, and I think I've seconded.
Right, thank you. So members, would you? Sorry, Councillor Dinas.
I just would like to add just a tiny bit to that. I'm happy for Kate to be doing the wording, and I have absolute confidence. I would just like the fact that they consult with the ward members. We have in the past had that conditions have been done outside the meeting, and they actually don't meet to what was sort of what we wanted. So if we can just add, happy to delegate, but working with the ward members. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sure our officers are happy to do that. So members, would you indicate those in favour of this amendment? Perfect. Thank you. I think that's unanimous, isn't it? Thank you. No, I know that Councillor Reid, a long time ago, had a question. Councillor Goodridge, is it directly related to what we were talking about, or is it?
But I'm happy that Councillor Reid had per se.
That's what I was hoping you would do. Councillor Reid, please.
Thank you, Chair. Talking about access, I think originally when the original planning outline, whatever it's called, was given, it was decided that the first Berkeley home development, which is the nearest to Knoll Lane, would be separate, and there would be no through road to the Oldfield Road through this development. I'm assuming that's still in place, but my concern is what would happen if we have emergency vehicles, and what would their access be? Because I know here it is suggested that the access road will be off Oldfield Road. maybe there's something in the middle of all of this development that in an emergency could be used. That's one of the things. I think I agree with Councillor Townsend about the Georgian style pillars, which is not in the Cranley vernacular. So I dislike that completely. Love the park. The natural materials, I wasn't going to mention, but I will, because we have a lot of visits to the United States and they don't use, I'm sorry, Councillor Townsend, the natural materials are very, very rarely used because they are not weatherproof and they don't last for very long, and they do look, natural materials look tatty earlier. Maybe that's why the developers using more man-made materials. I'm a bit concerned as well that the water feature is referred to as being in the middle of the village. I mean, the village itself is Cranley, for heaven's sake. The other question I have is about water. I think I read somewhere that it was Southern Water, and yet surely we're Thames Water in this area. That's another question. I agree about the issue with the flatted blocks. There has to be some outside space. I do not like Juliet balconies, but that's a personal thing. So I think, you know, what are we going to do with people who are held up in flatted blocks? How are they going to have access to this, you know, what was a lovely rural area? My other concern is about the Downs link. Now, I know that it says upgrade of lighting. You know, we are thinking about the birds and the beasts and natural areas. And for people walking at night, I know there has to be some sort of safety area, but we don't want huge amounts of lighting that's going to make the dark sky even lighter. And I don't see, but I'm assuming there is a good mix of housing on page 9 on the plan here. I don't see any details of where the flatted blocks are. I think the big Georgian building in the middle is what I assume will be the majority of the flatted block, but there are no indications of where the others are. My other concern, I know on the left-hand side of the plan on page 9, because I do walk this area quite a lot, there are trees which are mature oak trees, which are almost 300 years old. And I'm pleased to say that the housing is moved away from them, but to have any damage to those lovely, lovely old trees would be terrible. An awful lot of people living in Cranley use this area for walking. So I agree that we need to find out if they can still have this lovely access and lovely access. There are also hedges, and I'm not sure from some of the plans that I've looked at, even online, whether there was some indication that some hedges would be removed, and that is a big concern because hedgerows are very precious. They can be hundreds and hundreds of years old, and it's all very well having this new planting, but you know, it'll be another 100 years before they are encouraging, you know, wildlife. And my other point was about the electric charging points, but I think Councillor Darcy and Councillor Gray have the expertise on that, so I'll leave it to them. My final point is about the buffer zone. Now, I live very near the new Swallowhurst development. There was supposed to be a buffer zone there. It has not been put in place. I'd just like to know how we can ensure that these buffer zones are put in place and how can they be managed and policed, basically. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Reid. Kate, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Reid. So in relation to the issue of emergency access in effect across the site, the block plan as it's currently shown does show the access road going into the phase 1 area in fact, it will be going through into phase 4. So because this part of the site doesn't immediately adjoin phase 1, it's not where we know the detail of how that end will be managed. But when phase 4 comes forward, the applicant will obviously have to put something forward there, and I would expect with all the highway safety assessments that they would be thinking about emergency access there when that phase comes forward. In relation to the materials and officers seeking natural materials in relation to this development, I think a lot of the material choice obviously depends on the local context and the type of property. And here we have traditional style properties which are proposed with, you know, very traditional treatments to the elevations in the Surrey vernacular. So that's really the reason why we'd be looking for natural materials, because that marries up well with that particular style of building. And apologies if it's the report referring to the new area which has been termed a village square as being in the middle of the village. It is in effect in a fairly central position within this particular phase of the development, rather than the village being Cranley. In relation to the local water body, I think I've listed in the report possibly that we received a comment back from Southern Water, and because there are a number of statutory water undertakers in the borough, we always consult all. I think there were 3 of them, and we quite often get a response back from Southern Water if it's out of their area, just saying it's not in our area, which I think is what happened here. But we also got a comment back from Thames Water, which is where the recommendation for the phasing plan came from. In relation to the flatted blocks, if you bear with me, I can get back to where are we? Right, I'm sorry about this, but I'm probably not going to be able to immediately get back to the block plan. But in essence, there are a few units which have a few flats within them, but other than the one which you've identified, the Georgian building fronting onto the proposed village square, it's termed, there's also one adjacent to the boundary with phase 2. So that's to the west, which is a larger building. So if you can see that on the agenda, you can see a larger building there on that boundary, and that's proposed also to be flats and to be 3 stories. So they're the largest 2 buildings within the development. In relation to lighting, I do appreciate your concerns, and obviously the biodiversity impacts are something which we do need to be careful about. The outline consent, all of the conditions of which obviously also bind the reserve matters consent because they work as one. So the outline consent contains a condition which I believe is condition 14, which says that the applicant can't install external lighting which hasn't been previously approved by us. So in that respect, we would be able to prevent, you know, very harsh flood lighting or excessive lighting that would harm bats through that condition. In relation to the oak trees to the boundary, it's correct that they're all being retained, and indeed that there's been a fairly significant amendment to the application just to provide an additional root planting area to 2 veteran trees which are along that border, and the Woodland Trust have confirmed that that is a sufficient area now, which is in excess of sort of what you would provide for a standard tree. And in relation to the question around hedgerows, that the site is currently, and you will know more about what it looked like a number of years ago than me, I'm sure, but it's effectively one field, so there are no hedgerows within the site itself that are being removed. I saw within the arboricultural statement that there will be potentially sections of hedges which are raised, so that as with a passing road, that are thinned out on the lower parts, but there's no proposal to remove it, and that's obviously something which we'd also have included on the detailed landscaping as it comes forwards. And in relation to sort of ensuring the provision of and the maintenance of buffer zones, so we have sort of an indication shown on the site plan and within the landscaping master plan of where planting would be, and also we'll get further details at condition stage. This site being a very large site subject to legal agreement has the advantage that a management company would be set up, so they would be responsible for the ongoing maintenance there of the buffer zones and the landscaping insofar as the condition can control that. So it would in effect come down to the management company, in short. And I think that was everything. So thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Reid, okay.
I'm not quite happy about the buffer zone business, because they're now saying there's a management company. Is there going to be one or not?
Kate?
Yes, there would be for a site like this. Yes, that's correct. And that would be sort of obviously with a number of units being proposed, not rather than a single private family house where the responsibility for ongoing maintenance is clearly with that one property, because there's a collective, and there would be a management company that would be responsible for it.
But who oversees that?
Sorry, who oversees the management company?
No, the planting of the buffer zone in particular, and the maintenance. I know that they will maintain it, but the planting and establishing it, because it just hasn't been done at Swallowhurst, that's all.
Yeah, so I mean that would come down to the usual planning enforcement processes. So we have the condition on here requiring the landscaping to be provided. If there was an indication that they weren't doing that as per the details that had been provided, or that they were missing the trigger point and not providing details to us, then we'd be in a position to investigate it from an enforcement perspective. And I would expect, you know, that to be addressed, but if not, there would be breach of condition procedures that could be looked into.
Thanks, Kate. Councillor Goodridge at last. Sorry.
That's okay, Chairman. I have a fairly simple question, hopefully, concerning the community orchard and the village square. These are described, or the village square is described as a shared amenity space. Shared amenity of the whole of Cranley, or who? And the community orchard as well. I mean, it implies it's for the community of this phase, or the whole of Cranley. So can people in anywhere in Cranley go scrumping for apples, or is it only those that are living in this particular phase? And the upkeep, I mean, a rill and so on will take upkeep. I assume we referred to the management company just now. I mean, I would have thought the management company should have been set up by now, because we've got one phase just about complete. Presumably you're going to have a management company to cover the whole of this development, not just each phase. And how is that management company going to be financed for doing the maintenance of the orchard and the village square and rill? Because I can, you know, a rill could be a health and safety hazard, because it's running water down a channel. Small children could get themselves in it, and so on and so forth. So I'm a little concerned about the upkeep and who is going to be allowed to use the village square, which comes down to the highways bit about pavements and so on. And I wanted to include in that the village square, and should it be included, and should the community orchard be included? I mean, when we talk about community orchard, what community are we talking about?
Thank you, Councillor. Kate, I guess these are quite fine but essential details. Is this something that you're going to have on your list for discussing for a better condition? Or is it specific, or is it different? Sorry, Kate, you go ahead and
Yes,
tell
so
us.
I would say at least some of the matters described are already controlled within the legal agreement to be outlined. So for example, in relation to the community orchard, there is a clause within the legal agreement requiring that details of the ongoing management and maintenance are submitted to us for consideration. And again, the issue of the village square and how publicly accessible that would be, it comes down to the detail within the legal agreement. From Barry's advice earlier in the meeting, that does require for public accessibility. So it's not currently proposed to be something which we refer to specifically in a condition with regards to access, but notwithstanding that, we could add it in as a specific reference. In relation to the management company, having not been involved with the detail of discharging the legal agreement in relation to phase 1, I haven't been party to that, you know, any information we needed around that being set up. But as I understand it, the requirement in the legal agreement is in effect that's set up, so there should already be one in place for phase 1. In relation to health and safety issues around the rill, the landowner would be obliged to ensure that they carried out health and safety assessments on all sort of equipment or installations that they're provided. So that responsibility would be with the landowner in terms of the actual detailed installation. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. Councillor Goodrich, any comments on that?
It's the future health and safety. I mean, they'll build it safely, but it's then got to be maintained so it's safe. And if everybody in Cranley can go in there, you know, one's concerned on the one hand that the management company, which probably will be funded, I don't know whether it's going to be funded from all the houses on the development or whether the developer will put in a great chunk of money, which they hope in perpetuity will be enough to maintain it forever. But you can just imagine members of the public in Cranley who may not be totally desirable, causing damage, causing problems, needing quite a lot of money spent to restore it. And how's that going to be paid for unless it is publicly owned, like the highways and the pavements? If it's going to remain privately owned by a management company, I have concerns, and it should be adopted, it seems to me, in the same way as the pavements and highways. And therefore it's maintained at public expense.
Thank you, Councillor. As the whole of the beautiful village of Cranley is open to the public, or at least most of it is it? Kate, sorry, are you happy with that? Are we covered in what you said already?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just add that the, and just checking the specification in the reports here, that the existing legal agreement, which would bind any consent granted for phase 3, there is a requirement that the developer submits details of an open space management plan for each phase alongside a place space management for management plan for each phase. So when we're considering those, we can obviously look to, you know, scrutinise them in a level of detail to ensure that that management is secured in perpetuity. Thank you.
Great. Now,
Mr. Chairman, could I just add into
yes, please.
What Kate said and opposite Councillor Goodrich's comments? The legal agreement did come into existence very much in the context of the appeal that took place in, I think it was 2016, Berkeley Homes appeal. There's a clause in this document which makes clear it was passed by the inspector. No clauses have been struck out. There is provision for a management company. It's a very sparse provision. It doesn't make clear how that body is to be funded. But that management company is responsible for managing various things in accordance with specifications agreed with us beforehand. And in terms of the community orchard, there is to be submitted to the Borough Council a community orchard specification and management plan for our agreement, and thereafter the management company, upon completion of the community orchard, the applicant shall transfer this to the management company, who will be responsible for managing and maintaining the community orchard in accordance with the community orchard specification and management plan as agreed with us. So it's all a bit circular, the provisions, and had perhaps there been more time some years ago to work up a more detailed section 106, I think some of these questions would not be troubling the committee tonight. But I think now the way forward is for officers to work with the developers to seek clarity as to the way these matters are to be satisfactorily taken forward, Mr. Chairman. That's my voice.
Thank you very. I've got two more questioners, Councillor Denis and Councillor Darcy. Are we still on questions? I mean, I suppose there's not much else to be said after the questions, but perhaps Councillor Darcy. Sorry, Councillor Denis. Sorry, beg your pardon. I had you slightly before. Too many D's around the place.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll be quite brief because they're very specific questions. The first one is about if phase 4, and I think we all get confused on what phases are what, and phase 4 comes before phase 3, but if the final phases don't occur, what will be the position with some of the issues such as affordable housing and housing mix? Because I know on some of the early ones, there was very little affordable housing, which was to be made up at the later stages. So if we just do the ones that have been commenced or finished, plus tonight's, what will the actual position be with, for example, affordable housing? So if the final one doesn't happen, do we hit our affordable housing requirement? And this might be because I've had to do everything on computer because for some reason the papers never arrived. The location of affordable housing. And my final question will be, looking at the sizes of the locations, so individual houses, some seem to be almost to the inch of their life to the minimum, and some are massively in excess. And I just wanted a bit of, I suppose, comfort that all the affordable houses aren't the ones that are exactly to the millimetre to the requirement, and all the market are the ones that in far excess. Now, it might be, I know there was pages of plot numbers and figures, but because they're not actually shown on the map, which are affordable housing, I really couldn't work it out. And I would hate to see a developer almost discriminate by making the affordable the bare minimum and all the market to squeeze as much money as they can. So very simple questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Denis. Kate, you okay, or have we lost the internet connection or something?
Yes, no, I've just, I'm afraid, closed down the presentation, so I can't go back to it, but we have got a slide on there which shows the affordable housing distribution within the site. The application as it was originally submitted came forward with 3 or 4 clusters of affordable housing across the phase, and our housing enabling team asked if the developer could go that step further to cluster it further, and the developer was very proactive at making that change for us, even though it made quite a few changes to the scheme and the units proposed. So now, if we're able to get the presentation back up, I can show you an affordable housing plan, which shows that there would now be, I think it's 5 separate clusters of the affordable units, including some which are to the south of the Spine Road, which wasn't the case previously. So the overall position, and hopefully I can get you a visual, is that there would be, you know, a good distribution of the units, that they be well dispersed, and that's something that our housing enabling team are happy with. In relation to if, for example, phase 4 were to not come forward, I don't expect at all that would be the case here, because we're, you know, at a very advanced stage of the development now, and a lot's going on site. But if, for example, that were to be the case, the development and the provision of the affordable housing has actually been weighted towards earlier phases. So phase 2.1, which the committee has previously consented reserve matters for, is where really quite a large number of the affordable units would be. So I would expect in a hypothetical scenario where phase 4 were to not come forward, that the remainder of the development would actually probably support a slightly higher than 30% provision of affordable housing. So it's not that they've, you know, left the affordable to provide in later phases. I think, and I'm afraid I've not got the deed in front of me, but I think there are only 6 or 7 affordable units left after phase 3 to be delivered. And then in relation to the residential space standards and the eternal floor spaces, really there's a mix between the private and the affordable units of whether they just meet or exceed the space standards. All of the units do at least meet them, and some of the affordable units will be fairly significantly over. Some of them will be just on the requirement, but the key thing is that they will all meet the necessary standard. And I think probably quite often we see, with particularly 4 and 5 bedroom houses coming forward, that they're fairly substantially larger than the residential space standards, and because generally a greater proportion of the larger units are private, then that may have, you know, caused some of those units to be larger, but they all, you know, would be, you know, very good in relation to the residential standards generally. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. I think that gives me some comfort, and I'm sure with the prices that they're asking for those, you would think they would do the last phase, because there are quite substantial costs to these houses, and they're going to make a lot of money. But no, I'm grateful for your answer. That's given me some comfort. Thank you.
Councillor Darcy.
Thank you. Yeah, my first question is on page 30. There's it says impact on biodiversity, and the second paragraph of that particular section, it says a condition to secure biodiversity net gain is recommended, which the applicant has agreed. And then in the final paragraph, it says subject to the recommended condition, it's considered development would avoid harm to biodiversity, which is slightly different from net gain, by the way. So I wondered where is that condition, and does it refer to just this phase or to the whole site? So that's my sort of first question. The second question is, I assume this site is associated with the Knoll Park Sang. So is the net gain dependent on that, rather than it's going to be provided on site itself? That's my second question. My third question is about the community orchard, which I noticed that the varieties they'd chosen were very standard, mainstream, the sort of things you could buy in the shop. And I felt that was a missed opportunity, that you should have some heritage varieties. And I know that we've got some community orchards in other parts of Waverley where they've done a lot of work on heritage varieties of fruit. And I thought, if there's going to be a Section 106 agreement about this, couldn't we work that into it, that they should use heritage varieties, ideally ones that are local to the area? That'd be much more interesting for people, I'd have thought, than just be able to pick a Cox off the tree, which they could get in the supermarket. And I've lost count now. Is it the fourth question? This sits between the Downs Link and the Littlemead Brook, and then south of that, I believe there's going to be Knoll Park. So clearly there's going to be wildlife wishing to move through this development because the Downs Link is an important wildlife corridor, as is the brook, I would imagine, and hopefully the park will be. So there doesn't seem to be a lot in the way of green corridors for them to walk up and down, or even fly up and down. There's a hedgerow, but the hedgerow is broken by the road. So there's no safe crossing for them. So I was just something, again, a question really, can we not try and get people to consider wildlife corridors when they're designing these large developments? Oh, and if there is another question, sorry. Regarding the sustainability, I did find, it took me a lot of digging around in sort of previous applications, but in the original 2014 one, they did actually have a design and access statement, but all they had on it was one page in which it just more or less said, you know, we'll stick some insulation in or something on those lines. So what I wondered is, isn't it possible that we could have a checklist in which they have to provide this information in the design and access statement, so we get a standardized set of information, including the sustainability, such as, are they going to use gas boilers, or are they going to have heat pumps? You know, are there going to be solar panels? What sort of insulation, what standard of insulation do they propose? What sort of material in terms of carbon input to the material? All those sort of questions. Wouldn't it be best if we asked them up front, so that we would then have the answers when we were considering it? And even if we can't force them to do stuff, the fact they have to give that information makes it slightly embarrassing for them if they can't answer it in the way that the public would like it to be answered. And that in itself is likely to cause a change of practice. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Darcy. You've got my vote on that, though I'm sure we would never ever get to the end of that long list of things that we'd like them to tick off. But I would also like to speak in favour of the Cox's orange pippin. You know, it's not your ordinary apple, you know. Kate, sorry, enough of me.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Darcy. In relation to the question around the biodiversity condition, this is recommended condition 15 within the original report, and that we can't apply that across the whole site through this reserved matters application. So this application relates specifically to phase 3. But notwithstanding that, it would tie it up for this phase. And there was a similar condition in relation to phase 2.2. In relation to whether this relates to the Knoll Park Sang, no, it doesn't. It doesn't, you know, require the delivery of that in association with this application. In relation to the tree specifications, fruit tree specifications within the community orchard, as we've said, some have come forward with this application within the landscaping details, which we felt was satisfactory, and you know, notwithstanding that we have those details and officers haven't put any objection to those, we can make the comments known to the developer as they go forward, considering the full details of the landscaping that they come forward with. So they may at that stage choose to, you know, respond respond positively and look to provide heritage varieties within the orchard. With regards to wildlife corridors, you're correct that there wouldn't be a specific identified wildlife corridor running north-south through the site, but notwithstanding that, the existing as proposed western boundary of phase 3, so between this phase and phase 2.2, would remain, you know, having a substantial tree coverage, which in effect would fulfill that purpose to a substantial degree. But you know, that's something we can bear in mind as future applications and future phases within this development come forward. In relation to a sort of checklist in relation to sustainability, I think they're all very useful suggestions, and I can certainly share them with our validations team as we look forward. I think that the type of matters you're describing would need to be within the local validations checklist, and you know, that's something I can share with the rest of the team for consideration going forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. Councillor Darcy, okay with that as far as we can go?
Yeah, just brings me to the point I always make, which is the fact that we never get to see the LEMP when we're making our determination, and yet we're supposed to take it that it will provide all this wonderful net gain, but we have no idea.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Well, members, I'm tempted to see if we can roll to I may be untempted. Councillor Townsend.
I'm sorry, Chairman, to keep you from your fireside and slippers at the moment.
Sherry.
But Sherry.
I should be
but a couple of things. With considering the community space and the adoption of the roads and that we've spoken about, and the orchard and the community gardens and all that, I would just like to point out to officers that if it's not going to be private and it would fall to the local authority, that, to be honest, I'm not sure anyone's going to welcome maintaining a fountain at all, because I know you mentioned that it might be part of the SUDS. I don't think it is part of the SUDS, because because of the nature of SUDS, I think the fountain would end up being a bit murky after a very short amount of time. So I think it is really important that we know those details. And perhaps can I also say that I'm not sure about other members, but I am not certainly wedded to a fountain. I think it's unenvironmental. I think it would be costly to maintain for all the people. And whilst it might have seemed like a lovely idea when they were doing their 3D drawings, I'm not sure something that, and perhaps I don't know if members would like to put their hands up, but if we did remove the fountain, I'm not sure that it would be a huge loss, bearing in mind as well the health and safety things surrounding it. So perhaps I'm not sure how to deal with that, but going forward, we would need to know who is maintaining it, and also I for one would like it to be gone, I'm afraid. The other thing, I did have my condition about the badger, and although you said, Kate, that it would be, you thought it would be a good condition, I didn't have a seconder and it didn't sort of formally go through the process, so I would like that to go through the formal process. And also about the obscure windows on the flatted development and overlooking, and the fact that that didn't come through to a condition either, and I would also like that to come forward. And my last tiny bit, and this is probably for Barry in a way, in that if it is a private estate on private roads, there may also need to be a legal agreement with our our waste suppliers to enter the private estate and empty bins as well. I know previously there have been those agreements, so we can't just enter a private estate, without permission. So there are lots of things that we need to pick up should it end up being private, and I just don't want those lost in this planning application. But my condition for badgers, if I could have a seconder, and also to put through the obscure glass overlooking. I'm not sure whether you want to look at that first, Kate, before that one, but the badger one, I would like to perhaps get a seconder for that. everyone. Thank you.
Good. Right, Kate, does that make sense to you?
Yes, thank you for allowing me to briefly come back. In relation to the details of maintenance of the public open space and the community orchard, we would generally, as standard, expect that to be maintained by the developer going forward. And as we've discussed earlier, we have those details to come forward through the 106. So that's something we would be bearing in mind at that stage. In relation to the query around obscure glazing, I don't know if I'm looking at a different place to you, but I refer to, in relation to plot 282 to 293, the distance to the adjacent property, and say that just the separation distance in itself at 39 metres is sufficient to prevent any issue. I also refer separately to within the proposed units themselves and interlooking between them, saying that where there are facing elevations, they're bathrooms which would be obscure glazed. And I don't think that's a matter that it would be necessary to control by condition, because bathrooms and shower rooms and so on would as standard be provided with obscure glazing. So I don't think there is a condition there, but correct me if I'm not seeing something.
No, that's fine. I'm quite happy to take that one. Thank you.
Thank you.
And what about the undoing of the fountain? That's not in our powers, I presume.
So I would say we have we have a landscaping master plan with this application, and then we have details of landscaping reserved. If at condition stage the applicant were to come forward without a water feature there, I don't think that would be such a sort of violent departure from the master plan that it wouldn't be acceptable to be considered at condition stage. So obviously I'm sure the that Barclays would be listening to this conversation, so they may wish to withdraw it at that stage. I haven't seen a direct planning reason which would mean that I would necessarily insist on it not being provided, but I can certainly, you know, put the comments of the committee to them.
Thanks, Kate. Just a question from me. Does that mean that we're just back to the badgers as a condition at the moment? Is that the only condition then that officers are going to support us on? Right. Okay. Now, I'd like to come back to Councillor Reid and then Councillor Goodridge, if I may.
Thank you, Chair. I have found the reference to the removal of the hedges. If you'd look at the number 2 application site layout, it says, and it includes these clouds, and I don't know what that means. So is that where the affordables are going to be? But in the key up in the right hand top corner, it does say existing hedgerow to be removed. So that's why I mentioned it before. It's the one with all the clouds on. And what are the clouds?
Sorry, Kate, what?
Sorry, Chair, you have
Yes,
to come back.
of course I'm happy.
Thank you. Yes. So the clouds shown on the plan just relate to the changes proposed by the applicant, which have been either to increase the root protection area or to change the units, to change the distribution of the affordable and private, as we discussed. I haven't picked up that annotation, so I'm afraid I don't have the plan in front of me. So I'm not sure if the area to which it relates, but that is something we can look at, and if there is a potential issue there, we can maybe look at resolving through the landscaping. Don't know if you would have any further comments on that, Chris.
Thank you. It seems to me to be in the key that it could be existing hedgerow. It's sort of 2 or 3 parallel lines. They look as if they're slightly onto the Downs link, which is a bit of a worry in the plan.
Councillor Reid, I think it's going to be difficult for us to take this forward if we can't all see it. Can I just move to Councillor Goodridge at this point?
Yeah, I'm just trying to establish some facts. First fact I want to establish, Councillor Townsend keeps talking about a fountain. I see no reference in the paperwork to a fountain at all. It's page 20, penultimate paragraph. It describes the village vignette with a rill strip of water to the centre and seating laid to lawn, hedging in a formal Italianate planting pattern. So I don't think there is a fountain unless, because the report doesn't say it's a fountain, it just says there's a rill. So I'd quite like to know factually what we've got. On another matter, factually, we were just told that the affordable housing was spread in 5 different places. The report on page 21, third paragraph, says 3 clusters. Is that right or not? And just, I have mentioned it to Kate already, there's clearly a clerical error on page 18, just before the housing mix, which refers to phase 2.2, which should refer to phase 3. So I just want to get factually what we are dealing with. Is the affordable housing in 3 clusters or is it more? Is there a fountain? And if so, no reference to it in the papers, and a clerical error, which I'm sure Kate can acknowledge.
Kate, okay, you're a bit stuck.
Sorry, yes, no, I was just trying to get the presentation up to bring up the affordable housing plan, but I think the reference to 3 clusters of affordable housing there, I apologise, is an error based on the previous mix which was put forward. I understand it is 5 different clusters. In relation to the question around whether a fountain is proposed, it's my understanding that one is not. Again, I haven't got the plan in front of me, but I don't know if you have any further detail there in front of you, Chris. But yes, thank you.
Thank you, Kate. So the fountain is the same as the B52 found on moon disappears. Is that right?
Sorry, Chairman, it definitely is in the landscape scheme, the drawing online. It's a multi-pronged fountain that comes over at several different points on the rill, but I'm quite happy if it doesn't exist, to be honest.
All right.
Can I just say, Chair, that it is illustrated online, you know, in the documents, that this is in glorious Technicolor, and in fact, the fountain and the rill.
Yes, in a sort of realism, so to speak.
I don't know whether it's an example, used for an example, or whether it's...
Members, I don't want to get hung up on this if we're not sure if it's even there, and whether or not, even if it was there, we could actually remove it. But Kate, can you just help us out of this suds or quagmire or whatever we're in?
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, Barry might give some further, in terms of legal service, might give some further clarification about what we can and can't do via the condition. But my initial thought is that it is shown on, there is a plan with in terms of the landscape plan and the site plan that does show a central feature running through the site, and I think we could secure details of that, further details of that via condition, but I don't think we could in whole remove it by condition, because it is part of what is being proposed. So if we wanted to know, for instance, how deep it was and how much water it would contain, we could get those details via condition. But I don't think we could necessarily just remove it without going back and looking at a revised proposal on that front. So so my preference would be that we would add a condition asking for the details of that, rather than its submission, because I think that might be varying too far from what they've shown us. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Councillor Gray.
Thank you. Can I just, for the record, say that I'm quite in favour of a fountain. Certainly, if you look at the a lot of our European cities, and certainly the Italian ones, the fountains have been extremely useful in very hot temperatures. And as we are going to get hot temperatures up, I would certainly like to see a fountain here. So I just wouldn't like it to be all one-sided, that a fountain's not required.
I see a division starting up in this equitable Eastern Committee already. Right. Well, Councillor Townsend, you're interested in this fountain. So are you prepared to support a condition based on what Chris French has just come forward to?
I'm quite happy to have that condition, and also then, as Councillor Dean has said earlier, if the ward members could be consulted on what will end up there, and also on the results of all of the inquiries about the community and the roads and all that as well. If you could, please, that would be very helpful.
And at this point, you have a seconder, do you? Is it? Councillor Denis, okay. Right. Councillor Reid,
But I also
were you
ask-
seconding, or have you got a?
No. I just wanted to ask for an explanation on the necessity to remove the hedgerows, please.
Mr. French. Kate.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have an explanation of that, of why it's on the plan, or indeed why the developer feels it would be necessary. So
I just want to say
nothing.
that it is a rural community. It is not the centre of Florence. You know, I just rest my.
Would that it were, I think. So if we can pull this, Councillor Darcy, really, okay.
It's just a light-hearted comment. The illustration is actually from the Alhambra. So if they're going to be doing that, then I'm all in favour of it.
Well, thank you, Councillor, but well spotted. I'm surprised that nobody else spotted that as well. Now, sorry, Councillor Ellis, you're encouraging us to come to an end, I'm sure.
Really sorry to come in at this stage, Chairman. I'd looked at this in detail. People have asked very eloquently the questions I had, and so thank you for that. There are so many issues of concern here that we are going to be advised by the officers, who are going to need to go back to the applicants and then come back to us. I question, am I in a position to actually make a decision on this based on, okay, a good report, thank you very much, but on the number of questions and concerns that have been raised about the application? Thank you.
I think the decision that we could come to is that, or we have talked about, is that we are empowering our officers in conjunction with local councillors to be specific about details that we don't have before us. But I would have thought that it would be adequate to give that instructional condition personally. Members, would anybody like to comment on Councillor Ellis's view? Councillor Cossa.
I think this is quite tricky in a sense, Chairman. I mean, it does seem to me that when we're dealing with an application at this stage, we're looking much more broadly at what we have in front of us. So if we thought the design was just so unacceptable, I think we would probably want to turn it down and send it back. But I think what we've done this evening, in my judgment at least, is we've gone into properly, asked a lot of questions about a lot of details that don't seem to be fully part of this application to me. So I think what's being proposed is entirely sensible. That our officers, I am confident, because I've listened to their responses, have listened and have understood the points that the committee are taking. And I think if they take those back, discuss it with the developer and the ward members, I am content with that.
Thank you, Councillor. So am I. Any further comments, members? Councillor Denis? And then Councillor Ellis.
Yeah, just slightly off that one, and it's probably more of an observation because I agree with what's been said. Just talking about the car parking, which we haven't talked about at all, where for the 3-bedroom houses, I think there's 46 spaces short, but there are visitor car parking spaces. Well, if the 3-bedroom are short, they're going to be parking in visitors and there's going to be no space for the visitors anyway. It wouldn't be enough for me to turn something down, but I do think it's something in future on these larger applications. We
Okay.
need sufficient car parking spaces for the people that are living there and then consider visitor spaces in addition. I just wanted to raise that as a point,
Kate, please.
for the future.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Denis. So the requirement within the Waverley standards for 3-bedroom plus sized units is 2.5 spaces, which obviously you can't physically provide for one unit on site. So from my perspective, and here we're looking at an over provision overall, so even in excess of all the numbers when you add it up per unit, there would also be additional visitor spaces beyond that. I mean, my personal preference probably where I'm looking at it from scratch was for those 0.5 of spaces to be provided in somewhere that is a public area so that they can then be used by the, you know, the units which have the most demand of them. So, you know, I think overall there isn't a significant concern in relation to the parking from my perspective. Notwithstanding that you know, I do appreciate where you're coming from, and you know, the 3-bed units would at least have 2 spaces, which is you know, a fair provision. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. Councillor Ellis.
Thank you. Very quickly, I just wanted to reassure everybody, particularly the officers, that I was not questioning their integrity at all. I was just feeling there were a huge number of questions and issues that we had raised this evening. We were going to be faced with making a decision on this. And if perhaps some of these issues that came back to us, we were unhappy with it, we actually may have made the decision differently. So I accept that people are happy with what's being proposed. I just wanted to make my position clear. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Kate, if we come to the final hurdle then, have you been able to count up how many conditions we've got to? Do I detect 21 or is it 20?
I'm very sorry. I'm sorry, I haven't been counting. I've made a written note, and when it comes to preparing an updated condition schedule, I will listen back to the question part of the meeting in full,
right,
to make sure they are all included there.
All right.
Or do you need a number? I can go back through my notes now and
I think it's
Can we vote on the Badger one? Apparently Councillor Costa says we haven't voted on it.
I do believe
so I did have lots of seconders, but we didn't actually vote on it.
Well, that is very true, and I think that's a reasonable thing. So Councillor Townsend, set out your condition. Given the fact that we know you already have at least 3 seconders, and then we can vote on it unless members want to do it the other way around.
So the condition would be that immediately prior to the start of development works, a survey by an appropriately qualified ecologist should be undertaken to check for any new signs of badger set construction on site, as outlined in the Surrey Wildlife Trust letter of the 28th of June 2021.
Thank you. And just for the record, you have seconders? Yeah, that's fine. And members, are you all in agreement with that? Agreed. Thank you very much. Right. So, Kate, can we then come to the recommendation that permission be granted subject to conditions 1 to 21? Ish.
22 with the badgers.
Oh,
no, I think it's 20. I think badgers was 21 by my reckoning. Yeah, we had 18 and 19, and then I believe we had two additional ones from 18 and 19.
Yeah.
think that means we've got 22 conditions in total and an amendment to the electric vehicle charging point
Okay.
condition.
Councillor Goodrich, yes?
I was going to say the 21 conditions are printed and those conditions
Yes.
agreed at the meeting.
Yes, I'm
Those
happy with
wording
that.
and then that you're not hung up by a number.
Exactly. Members, are you happy to vote on that? Those in favour?
Agreed.
Any against? And any abstentions? Ooh, I thought, Chris, you were voting to abstain. I'm sorry.
I believe that's unanimous, Chair.
Unanimous. Right, thank you very much. Well, thank you, members, one and all, but in particular to our excellent officers tonight who deserve at least the rest of the night off. Sorry? What do you think, Kim?
Yeah, we can do, yeah, at least it.
Yeah, so,
About 3/4 of our discussion has no outcome.
right, so councillor Costa, you would be looking for a resolution that we would vote on now, is that right?
I can see it can be gone.
In the meantime, councillor,
We mustn't forget the informatives, because we
Sorry?
haven't agreed the informatives either, so, because there was 2 additional informatives. Sorry, but we need to do that.
no, you're right.
There are 9 informatives recommended in total. And thank you for the reminder, Councillor Dunas. Thank you.
How are we going, Kim? All right.
As for the resolution, are you happy to agree that officers will agree the wording of the additional conditions in consultation with ward councillors?
It's,
And informative.
but it's not a condition really, is it? It's actually a delegated powers that we agree to delegate powers
Yeah.
to officers to find out all of those questions as agreed in the meeting and in consultation with the developer and with ward councillors.
Yeah.
Wanting to put a spanner in the works, but if as a result of those discussions, the officers are horrified and the members are even more horrified, what then happens?
I think Barry is trying to say
Yeah.
something. Tell
Well,
us.
Mr. Chairman, I think following the general feeling of the meeting, I think there needs to be some provision to bring the matters, any necessary matters back to committee. I don't know what my planning
Would
colleagues think about
suggest that discussions take place and you know, if officers and local members are happy, then that's fine. But if they're not, the matter comes back to committee.
I must say, I assume.
Well,
My question then is, in that case, how can we actually approve the recommendation? We can't come back to it.
It might.
Barry, please.
It might. One wonders whether a deferral might be a better way of doing it, Mr. Chairman. Bring it back.
Hang on, Councillor. Chris, please.
Thank you, Chairman. My understanding was that it would be or could be done through a defer and delegate subject to, which unfortunately would be a consultation rather than having to have it agreed, and therefore the details would be subject to scrutiny by officers, but would allow us to then issue the decision afterwards. Now, I think the main matters that we're talking about here are things like a wording of a condition to do with the ensuring the footpath links remain in use, and details of the water feature, which in principle you would be accepting, but wanting to understand the finer details. So I think my understanding is that whilst we would be in consultation, it would then be for us to, as officers, agree those details and agree those conditions, and then have the details come back at a later stage. So things like the water feature condition, we would be looking for a condition, not for the details at this stage. So that would be things like finer details of the water feature to be submitted and approved. But it wouldn't ask for those details to be provided until there'll be a trigger. But it'd be things like wording of conditions that we're looking to resolve. Therefore, it wouldn't be the intention for it to come back. Was my thoughts on that.
And Kate?
Yes, and sorry if I could just add on that point. I know in the discussions we've had, there have been some talks about the matters which are delegated to officers going forwards, about us negotiating with the developer around those matters. That's not what the issue is. So all of the matters suggested, they're not in relation to pre-commencement issues other than the Badger survey, which I'm sure would be acceptable. So they're not things which we need to get a permission from the developer to attach as a condition, if that makes sense. So in that respect, I don't perceive that there is really a risk there of us not being able to come to a satisfactory position through the officer's delegation, because it just really, I think really I probably suggested it to give us a bit more time to think about the wording in detail, because quite often I'm emailing Councillor Rivers and saying, I've suggested this condition in the meeting, but actually thinking about it, I need to add this, this and this. So that's the only reason really. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. Councillor Cossar? And
can I just say I very much share that, Chairman, and I think the test is simply this: is there anything, and there isn't for me, in what we've discussed about getting that word in and those details and so on right, which if whichever way it went in the sense would cause me to change my decision this evening to grant permission on the conditions we've been asked to, and the answer is no. So I can actually see no point or purpose in the matter coming back to this committee. I think we've indicated things we want to be sorted out and detailed. Let's get on with that. Let the officers do that in consultation with local members. I don't think it should affect our decision this evening.
I mean, I'm certainly agreeing with that, and I don't think the officers would have a problem with us voting in that way. Councillor Townsend?
Can I just ask for clarification? Apologies, everybody. Just because I think Councillor Harris has got a very, very good point, and I know that Barry was suggesting maybe a deferral, which makes me a little bit sort of feeling slightly uncomfortable. But hypothetically, I know that this came through on appeal, and the details of the management company are scant, which isn't usually the situation we find ourselves in. So hypothetically, if we went back to the developer and they said, oh no, all the roads are going to be adopted and all of these public spaces are going to fall to the public purse, I think that we would have to have quite a few conversations about that. So can we, hypothetically, could that conversation still take place? Could we still, say, well, how would we deal with that?
My assumption on that is that we are delegating that to the officers to resolve.
I'm just making sure that that's within that hypothetical situation is within that delegation area.
Chris?
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry, I probably should have clarified sooner. The management company and the mechanisms for that are all part of the outline consent. So really, what I understand we're delegating for us to agree are the details of how we would word certain conditions. How they choose to manage and what the management strategy will be is all secured via the 106 agreement, so sits outside of this reserve matters application. Okay.
Okay, so.
Thank you, Chris.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor. So I think we can look at the recommendation that permission be granted subject to conditions 1 to 22 and informatives 1 to 8, 9.
And the resolution, sorry, Chairman,
The
to
resolution,
delegate.
we've already made the resolution, haven't we? Right. In which case, members, may I see who is in favour of that recommendation? And any against? And any abstentions? Well, I think congratulations, members. I think we've worked that through very wisely and sensibly. And we've got our fingers crossed, and thank you, officers, indeed. And unless somebody comes up with another, that's it. Thank you very much.
Message from Jenny, you're